Hi, everybody. This week for my presentation, I decided that I was going to present on the stages and steps to putting together and hosting a convening event. At the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, a lot of what I do is putting together different events, whether it's a convening event, just a meeting, webinars. So, a lot of it all of these events have a lot of the same steps, and I think no matter where you work, if even if you're not specifically in the research world, a lot of people do plan and host different events. And so I think that the stages and the steps and then the little tips that I've learned along the way would make for a really good presentation. And so the audience that I would be targeting are people who work in the industry that do put together these events. So when I start my presentation, the first thing that I would do is I would establish who I have in the audience. A lot of people who come to presentations such as this one, some of them have already planned and hosted events. And what I would like to do is know who has already planned events and are just looking for more tips, and who's never planned an event before. Because the way that you would go about a presentation that provides these tips and these steps would be a little different if the audience already knows or has already done this, as opposed to coming into this fresh for the first time. So once I established where the audience was, I would then open up with a PowerPoint, and in this PowerPoint I would work through what the different steps and stages are. For the first step, I would make sure that the audience knows the importance of knowing and establishing the material that would be covered during the event ahead of time. You can't really move into the meat and potatoes of an event and planning an event until you know exactly what material is going to be covered. So a large part of the planning process is going to be exactly this section. So even though there are steps that are going to follow, the biggest piece that's going to continue to come up that will be continually worked on is this material, and refining it to be exactly the piece that you want to cover, whether it's throughout the day, throughout the presentation, throughout the speech. The second step would be identifying key stakeholders that you would like to have speak as presenters. A very important and strong part of hosting a convening event is bringing together different people who have already established themselves as stakeholders within the industry or within the specific subject that you are covering. So by pulling together, not only starting with where you are and being a presenter based off of how you've already established yourself, being able to bring in additional speakers really increases the credibility of the information that's being shared at the event. Step 3 then moves to determining the target audience. Who do you want to have at this event? Now, step 3 is a really fun one in my opinion, because based off of the type of convening event you host determines the audience that you're going to be having. So for some convening events, you may only want to be bringing in stakeholders that are already in the industry, because after the event you're looking for specific feedback and output, and you're trying to put together a packet of information about this specific area that would really require key people in the industry already in their feedback. The other part is if you're looking for outside input. And so if you're looking for outside input, these events are fun because then you can have the key industry people already there, but you can also invite people who aren't familiar with the area, and then you're really getting consumer feedback, I guess you could say. After you determine the audience that you're going to be presenting to, it's time to lock down the venue. And then if it's an all-day event or if it runs through lunch, you're going to want to cover food because nobody likes hungry, cranky people. So when you lock down the venue, one piece that I would really make sure that I'm putting emphasis on is location, location, location. When you hold events, especially the events that we hold at the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, we have people come in from all over the country. And not only do they come from all over the country, but we have people come internationally. So when locking down the venue, it is critical that you are paying attention to where the venue is. You need to make sure that the venue is accessible for local transit. Can Uber get there? Can they get there via taxi? Can they walk? Can they get easily from the airport where they're flying in from to the venue? Does the venue have hotels by it? If people are flying or driving or taking a train, you don't want them staying on one side of town and the venue being on the other. So a very important part to be paying attention to is where your venue is located. After that, once you've started narrowing that piece down and you can think about food, one great thing about venues that host events regularly is they tend to have their own catering company, but not all of them do. So if you end up choosing a catering company a venue that doesn't already have a catering company, the next piece would then be to move looking for a company that's in the area that's going to be able to work with the venue and with the venue's hours. After you determine the material, determine some speakers, you pick a target audience, and you lock down a venue, the fun part begins. And this is when we can send out things like save the date. A save the date should always be sent before an RSVP, because what you want to do is you want to get this event on people's calendars and on their mind. So once you've determined who the audience is going to be, you can then send out this save the date. And on the save the date, you can include the information that you already have locked down, such as the venue. Provide them when and where it's going to be. What's the date? What's the time? Are you going to be providing food during that time? Great. Who are the speakers and what's your rough draft agenda? People are more likely to come if you tell them who's already going to be there. You're going to pique their interest. They're going to want to know what these people have to say. And that's why it is so important to start with those first 4 steps, starting with what exactly are you talking about? Who's going to be there to provide further credentials to what you're saying? Where is it going to be? And is it going to be easy for people to get to? Once you send out your save the date, it's really important to make sure you finalize all of your contracts, because at this point, people know about your event. People have the idea of where it's going to be. So you need to make sure that the contracts for the venue are signed, make sure that the date and the time and the general range of guests that you anticipate having is correct. And you need to make sure that that is also done with the catering company. Fortunately, with the catering company, there's a little bit more leeway, because catering companies understand that you're not going to know the true amount of people that are coming up until a few days before, because up until a few days before, people are going to be continuing to register and continuing to say, yep, I'm coming, sign me up. So you really get some flexibility there with the catering, which is great. One area that you may not get as much flexibility again is with the venue, which is why you want to make sure that this contract is signed, because if you're renting or using just a specific room, that room may have a certain capacity. So you want to make sure that the contract is finalized after the save the date, because after the save the date and after you finalize contracts, you can then begin to make sure that all material is finalized. You can make sure that the agenda is 100% the way you plan for it to be. You can make sure that all the material is set and locked, and that all of the speakers are locked in, and that they are dedicated and have their transportation arrangements covered. And you can really begin to develop things like a logistical page, which shows people who RSVP, okay, if you fly into this airport or this airport, which being in Washington, D.C. tends to be an issue and kind of a tricky one to maneuver around because D.C. has 2 airports and then we're only a 30-minute drive from Baltimore Washington Airport. So we really have people who ask us questions about all different kinds of transportation because we have 3 airports alone that they can come in on. So a logistical page is really important because you can identify the places that they can fly in, how they can get from those airports to the venue, and then ways that they can get around. If they're going via metro, for instance, let them know what metro stop your venue is at. So it's important to get all of those pieces together because then the next step is sending out the RSVP. The RSVP is a little different from the save the date because the RSVP is going to be that assurance piece that yes, this is the material. Yes, these are the speakers. Here's the agenda. And then you're going to include a link that allows them to register. And this is great. I am a huge advocate of making sure that your RSVP includes a registration link because if people can register in advance, if you're sending this out in enough time, then you're going to slowly have registrants start trickling in, and that is key to planning ahead. If you can begin to know who is coming in advance, you're going to be able to plan and you are going to be able to start making lists. Okay, great. Who's coming? Do they have dietary restrictions? When are they coming in? If it's a more than one day event, are they only registered for the first day? Do they plan on attending the first and the second day? Registering in advance is going to save you a lot of headache as you come closer to the date of the event. At this point, you're really in the home stretch when it comes to planning this convening event. And you've done most of the big hauling up at this point, and now we just come down to those last minute tedious little tasks that need to get done, and they're not hard. They're not hard by any means, but if you do them and you take the time to do them well, it's really going to make your event seem like you thought through it. It's going to look very planned. You're going to show that you thought about this and that you've put the registrants first and in mind, and that you want this to be as easy as possible for them. So the next step is making the final menu changes. As I kind of touched on earlier, catering companies are really, really generous when it comes to how far in advance you have to give them the final menu changes as well as the final guest count. Most places, they're going to give you a 5 to 10 day block, and they're going to say what, and they'll tell you which specific day that is. So for instance, if it's 5 days prior to the event, they are going to tell you, we need to know your final menu like selections 5 days prior to the event, and we're going to need your estimated head count. This is going to make sure that you have all of the food that you need and that you don't run out, because let me tell you from experience, that is never a good sign. You're calling Uber Eats, you're ordering things to be delivered. Having this registration ahead of time is so important because you can avoid catastrophes like that. Once you make those final selections, you're able to complete the registration materials. And the registration materials, these are what I was talking about, that are going to show that your event was planned well and planned in advance. Registration materials include things as simple as name badges. Because people have been registering in advance, you know who's coming. You probably know where they're coming from. And you're able to print these name badges out. Let them know that you knew they were coming and that you're excited that they're there. You can also put together materials such as table tent cards. These will also have their names on them. And at first it seems a little redundant. Why would you have the name badge and the table tent card? The table tent card comes in handy if they're all sitting around one table and somebody is speaking. If I'm sitting across from the table from you and I'm like looking at you like this, even then I'm not really going to be able to read your name badge. And so these table tent cards are going to allow people on the other side of the table or a little across the way to not only hear you, but be able to know who you are when you're speaking. And this is huge for networking, and that tends to be a really big piece of these events and why you're bringing people together. You're bringing these people together because they're strange bedfellows and you want to bring them together because it's the best way that you can get moonshot ideas if that's what you're looking for. So, name badges, tent cards. You can also put together event booklets, and these booklets can include the name of the event, what the mission and rationale behind this event is. You can put the agenda in there. You can even list the speakers with their headshots and their bios. This booklet really shows, here's why you're here today. And just like the name badges or the tent cards, all this does is show that you've put the time and effort into this event and that you want it to be successful. If nothing else, it's for the people who are coming, and that's why you're doing these additional little pieces. After that, you only have 2 steps left. And these 2 steps are the steps where you're going to have to keep the most level head because they're the hardest part in my personal opinion. The next step is going to be running through the event. And running through the event is, I say this a lot, and I'm realizing that now as I'm running through all of these steps, also largely important. When you run through this event, you're going to know what speakers haven't given you the presentations. What are other little things that could go wrong? If you have a microphone, if your speakers are speaking through a microphone, do you have backups? Because eventually the battery in the microphone will run out. Making sure you have things like that, making sure you've thought ahead. Okay, which presentations do I need? Do I have them saved in multiple places? Is my audio visual covered? Do I know how to work it? Have I spoken to the right people and know who to contact if something happens and I don't know how to fix it? This run through is going to give you the chance to hit all of these accidents the day before so you can avoid them in the future. After that, it's event day, and that's the final step. And I know that seems like a funny final step, but it's the most exhilarating one. It's the one where your heart is going to be racing and it's going to be pounding all day, where you're going to have so many things running through your brain that it was a good thing you went through the run through the day before, because you don't have time to think about the agenda, but you went through the run through, so it's okay. It's already there. Your brain is programmed to know what to do. And things are going to pop up. Things always pop up without fail every single event. Someone's going to have heard about your event via word of mouth. They're going to show up. They didn't register, but that's okay, because at the end of the day, all that means is that there are more people who are interested in what you have to talk about. So you smile, and it's fine because you brought blank name badges where you can hand them a pen, you can hand them the name badge, and they can write their name down. You register them because you brought a laptop that has the registration page so that you have record of who was at your event. And this is it. And you run through, and your event is done. So I ran through the steps. One thing that I didn't mention prior to doing that section of what my presentation would be, I forgot to say and talk a little bit more about my material. So I did mention that I would have the PowerPoint that would serve as a visual aid while going through these steps. One additional piece that I had is a document that is the steps and tips. And what I did was I mapped out all of these steps, and it would be a sheet of paper that I would hand out prior to the presentation. It has all of the steps. I included tips underneath each step that I believe to be important for that step. And then I provided a note section. And I think the note section is great because depending on the level of the audience, whether it's somebody, like I said, who's already planned an event and they're just looking for additional information, or somebody who has never planned an event before, it gives them a space to jot down what they believe is important. Because I can sit and give this speech and demonstration all day, every day, because I've been through it and I know what's important for me and what's important for me to remember. But just because it's important to me does not mean it's the piece that somebody else needs to remember. So I wanted to make sure that I included that section for notes. Along with that helpful piece of paper, the other thing that I want to do at the very end is hand out a survey. And I want to have this survey so that I can know how I did, and so that I can understand further what the audience believed to be helpful and what the audience believed to not be helpful. So once I run through the presentation, I would hand out the survey, and that would be the end of my demonstration. I really look forward to getting some feedback, and thanks so much.